Hi everyone. I am so excited to finally welcome you all to my YouTube channel, TheRoseNduta. Now, this has been something I've been working on for a very long time in terms of how do I finally explain some of the lessons that I've learned in finance, in career growth, and in finally taking control of my life to get to where I am right now. Now, a little bit about me. I currently work at a Fortune 500 company within a leadership role, and I am very proud of having gone to there, and specifically the way that I've grown within that company. In addition to that, I currently reside in Baltimore. I was born in Kenya, moved a little bit of everywhere, and ended up going to the illustrious Howard University, which I'm very proud of. And throughout my journey from Kenya to here in Baltimore, I've always had a passion for finance. I've always had a passion for mentoring. I've always had a passion for health, and specifically how all of those things kind of play into each other to help make us who we are. And the goal of this channel is to be able to grow with you guys as we are figuring out how to have a more rose gold life. With that being said, we're now going to talk about how specifically I ended up getting out of over $70,000 in debt to get to where I am now with a really healthy investment portfolio and solid enough savings account that I can now kind of focus on really building versus kind of where I was with all of things. Now, the first thing is, how do you even get into $70,000 in debt? So as I said earlier, I graduated from Howard University, and while I was there, I initially thought that I was going to get a full tuitions and room and board and all these other scholarships, but in the end of the day, once I actually showed up, for whatever reason, the A building, the administration building, there was some mess in the paperwork, and all I specifically got, which I still recognize as a lot, is my tuition and some fees paid for. So I was very thankful for that. But that did mean that I was coming in unprepared to now take on loans and kind of be in a situation that I did not expect to. With that being said, Howard was an incredible experience. I'm very thankful for that. Even in the rough and growing parts of it, I worked multiple jobs. I hustled as much as I could. I found ways to just finesse and try to do whatever I needed to do to graduate with as little debt as possible, which in the end was still about $50,000 worth of debt. Another thing that I unfortunately did is, even while I was still in debt, in the years coming out of Howard, I ended up buying a car, which added about $18,000 worth of debt. And on top of that, my first job coming out of college, I wasn't making that much. I really was not. So I was making around $16,000 that year because my main job primarily focused on paying you commission and then a small little base salary. But turns out they made a policy change somehow in that first year, and I didn't end up getting that the money that I thought they were going to give me, because like that wasn't going to be given to me until after year one. So I just wasn't making money. So I ended up getting a second job, and that helped cover some of my living expenses, but I was still not in a really good place, especially living in DC of all places, which is incredibly expensive. So $16,000 a year doesn't really take you anywhere. It does not. So 16 just meant that I was consistently out of money. With that being said, I then ended up being in a really bad situation where I wasn't taking care of myself, and then ended up getting into some healthcare medical debt, as I ended up having a mini heart attack within the first 6 months of graduating. So that meant now I had another about $30,000 in bills that I just couldn't cover, period. So that was how all my debt came together. And I know what you're saying. The first thing is like, that's more than $70,000. Yes, it's definitely more than $70,000. So this is the first thing that I did, and I wrote it all down so they can try to like explain it to you guys in a method that makes sense. So the first thing you got to do, I think, to get out of debt, and first thing I definitely did, was I made sure I understood what my debt was, because that's what I didn't. I understood how much of my debt was being paid in principal, how much of the money that I was paying was going towards principal versus actual debt, and turns out most of it was not going to the principals. I was primarily paying interest, and that's just what was happening. The second was understanding which debts were negotiable. So it turns out medical debt sometimes is negotiable. And I was able to explain to them, like, look at my W-2. I don't have the money, and I won't have the money for a very long time to pay you back. So they had, that specific hospital had some programs that focused on helping people who are just lower income pay off some of their debts and also forgive some of their debt. And I luckily qualified for some of that, so that paid off almost all but $5,000. And okay, I was like, okay, 5,000 is still a lot when that's technically a third of what I make all year, but it's better than what it would have been. So I learned what was negotiable. The second was understanding what money was, where I could get a better interest rate. So for example, I learned that if I went from having a big bank, which had a really high interest rate, versus going to a credit union for my car loan, that credit union ended up significantly saving me hundreds of dollars, because it was a 1.7% interest rate if you opened up a checking and a savings account there. And I was like, oh, I'll do that. That credit union was truly everything for me, versus because I still needed a method to get to work. I needed a method to like travel, but this was a way that I could do it. So overall, I now finally understood, whenever I was making payments, how to make sure that I was paying towards a principal, what type of payment plans were out there, what could be negotiated to get rid of it early, as well as like how do I get better interest rates. So that was thing number one, was really just fully understanding my debt. Thing number two was understanding my income. And I learned that because I was living in DC, I was living in one of the highest tax brackets for people who are lower income because of how DC works. So I needed to move outside of DC, and I ended up moving to New Hampshire, which is where my parents were. And by moving back home, I went to a state that had no income tax. That therefore just becomes money that I can use to pay off my debts or just maybe breathe a little bit. And that's what I needed. So even whenever I did finally get a different job, because I ended up losing my first job, I was now a lot more conscious of living in places that had a lower tax burden on the people who were living there. And that was absolutely instrumental in being open to moving to places that it is literally everything. Right now, a lot of people can work from home. So if you could work from a Florida, a Texas, a Delaware, New Hampshire, do that. Because at the end of the day, that is going to save you a significant portion, or just an amount that'll work. You know, at the end of the day, some of these places, they're paying like 9% in income taxes. Imagine if you had 9% of your money back to do something else with it, especially in this current economy. That, for some people, is being able to put more food on the table, being able to pay off a medical bill, or maybe being able to afford a better insurance. Things that I wish that I could have done and finally eventually had to do for my own sanity's sake. So the third thing is, make sure you understand what your actual bills are in terms of what's required. This is separate from your debts. So for example, if I learned that some of my bills, if I just put them on automatic payments, I was saving $5 to $10 on each of those bills. So I started changing the ones that I could put on automatic to automatic so that I could, get that negotiated savings. Second thing, I started figuring out, okay, does my company offer any savings? And it turns out we had, partnerships with some folks to get $5 to $10 off of certain things. So then that also saved me. I then started looking into, okay, if I switch from Comcast to Verizon or Verizon to Comcast, like, who's gonna give me a better deal? Like, you have to shop. And I know this may seem like a lot of work at first, but it gives you breathing room later on when it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. In doing this, I think I was able to save almost $200 in in bills monthly, from entertainment to my actual house bills, because I was finding the best deals in our local area, and I was willing to, stay on the phone with Comcast or with Verizon to figure out how to do this. And also figure out, okay, will this person pay for my streaming service, or do I really need cable if I don't actually like watching TV, and instead I just like watching like a streaming service? Okay, no, then I'll cut this. And in doing that, as I said, I was getting $200 back into my wallet that I could then use for something significantly better. So with this being said, I then downloaded 2 apps that I think were really helpful in easily tracking where my money was going. So I did Mint and Truebill. Both of them are great in just explaining like, hey, this is how much money is coming in, this is how much money is coming out. Maybe you can negotiate this bill or that bill to get it down to a significantly better place. And I did that, and I was able to realize, okay, I'm spending a lot of money in this one category, and it's not a category that I need, so maybe next month my focus will be on limiting this one category. And little by little, I finally understood the flow of my money, and that was absolutely monumental. So with that being said, the next thing became like, how do I pick a debt strategy? Now this I think then changed the game for me. So there's 2 strategies that I was looking at the time, and both were based off of Dave Ramsey's methods that I was learning from him by just watching his podcast and other things. And the first was the debt snowball method. And basically you would pay you put all your focus on your smallest bill, your smallest debt, and then you pay just the minimums on the other ones. And once you pay this one off, you then snowball, whatever you'd be paying for that one onto your next smallest bill. And then snowball those 2 combined onto your next smallest bill. And you keep going till you are finally attacking the largest possible debt that you have. But on your way there, you're crushing, debt after debt after debt after debt, and it just makes you feel like you're accomplishing things consistently. And that helped me just stay motivated within this process and feel like I was strategic in how I was attacking things. And even whenever I was paying extra towards a bill, I was also calling them and making sure that the money was going towards the extra money that I was paying that was above the minimum was going towards the interest. I also called and made sure all of my minimums covered 100% of the interest. Because if I was saving $200 from my utilities, I then took that $200 and made it so that it was like little topper, so that none of my principals grew within this process. So that then just meant that, okay, everything stayed stagnant at the least while I tacked debt by debt by debt by debt by debt until I was finally at the big monster that kind of, tipped me over the edge. So then finally the part that a lot of us don't talk about, which is you're gonna have to figure out how to make more money. And I remember whenever I was switching because I lost my first job and I still had another job, but it wasn't working out at that time. I still wasn't making enough money, so I needed to transition out. And I ended up going to a temp agency, and that temp agency helped me understand 3 really key things. The first is that my resume was trash. The second was that I did not understand the interview styles of the companies that I was interviewing for, and that's what was another reason why whenever I did get interviews, I wasn't successful in landing that role. And the third was that I did not know how to negotiate money, specifically salary, and as a way of selling myself. So the thing that changed my resume, and this is something I'll talk about in a later video, is I learned how to change my resume from being just all of this massive job description to instead being one bullet point that explains, hey, this is what I did, so that the person who's reading my resume has an understanding of what my actual job was. But then 2-3 points after that was, this is why I am successful here. This was my true impact with metrics involved, so that it's okay, this was my job, but then also saved X thousands of dollars by doing this, or led a team of 40-something people to accomplish this % increase in productivity. It was bangers, right? And in doing that, I could quickly sell myself to a recruiter by explaining them and not wasting their time as they were trying to figure out, what in the world do you really bring here? And quickly they understood, oh, she is probably a potentially really good candidate, okay? So then that fixed my resume situation. Now, as for my interview situation, I needed to practice, but more importantly, I needed to understand what interview style those interviewers were actually asking me questions in. So for us at my company, I work at a larger supply chain organization, we use something called the STAR method. And with the STAR method, it's a very concise, structured way of explaining what the situation was that you were dealing with, what the task was at hand, what action you took, and what you delivered as a result. And that also led me to my last point, was how do I sell myself? How do I negotiate things? It was by learning how to quantify my impact, how to monetize my impact. So I learned how to partner with people who are in the finance departments of the companies that I was working at and figure out, okay, how much money was I saving? Or maybe working with HR to be like, how was I driving engagement or decreasing attrition or helping on these people metrics that were important? Because then I also knew whenever I was in certain roles, how to strategically focus myself to help our company grow and also develop myself and develop the people around me and have a much stronger story for why I should get promoted or why I should get paid more. Because before I did that and before I learned how to sell myself, I was kind of just floating, and there was a reason why they possibly weren't paying me what I wanted, was because I didn't even know how to explain to them, like, this is why I'm important and valuable to you. So in doing those are things that I'm going to go into depth with over the course of this channel, because I think in doing all of this, I then kind of got myself to a position where I was paying off my debts in a strategic way and I was increasing my income consistently, and I knew how to do that. So by doing those two things together, I went from just paying a little bit of my debt to just massively just shutting it down and getting to the point where now my focus is investing and on helping others and on building my brand and building my business. And the goal of this channel will be on how to share what I have learned during this time. So if you have questions on personal finance, if you like this video, please like this. If you have questions on career growth, on resume building, on how to, pivot and switch your career up like I did, because I went from, hospitality to some music stuff, to nonprofits, to working in supply chain, to being an engineer, all these different things. And I've consistently kind of leveled up in my career, and I would love to share with you how I did it for myself, as well as how I mentor other folks to do the same thing. I'm more than glad to share, and I just want to thank you for tuning in on this very long video, but on my intro video to myself and my journey to get to where I am right now. Once again, please like this video, please share this video, please subscribe, and comment on one of the following things. First, something that you learned in this video, maybe something you'd love to share with someone else, feedback for me, and feel free to follow me on all my socials, which are all TheRoseNduta. And I'll be more than glad to talk to you guys and get to know you guys a little bit better as we figure out how to grow this platform to benefit us all. Beyond that, thank you, and thank you. Kwaheri.